Usually when we evaluate military strategy, whether we are looking at ancient human history or, I don't know, the vast sprawling conflicts of the wider galaxy, there is this underlying expectation of tactical precision.
Right. How's it go?
Like, we tend to think in terms of surgical strikes,
Hmm.
We picture an army capturing a capital city or maybe special forces dismantling a very specific enemy stronghold.
Yeah, you take out the communications grid or you neutralize the opposing leadership.
Exactly. And eventually the enemy surrenders. It's a calculated, sort of scaled response to a specific problem. You apply pressure exactly where it hurts the most to force a desired outcome.
It is fundamentally about proportionality. I mean, you use the exact amount of force required to achieve your objective. And ideally, you preserve the infrastructure, the atmosphere, the actual resources of the territory you were trying to conquer.
Because you want to use them later.
Precisely. The core philosophy of almost all conventional warfare is acquisition and control. You want to own the land, not turn it into a lifeless crater.
But then you step into the historical records we are looking at today, and suddenly that entire foundational concept of proportional warfare it's just thrown out the airlock.
Yeah, it completely goes out the window.
We are looking at a strategic landscape that requires a total recalibration of how we understand conflict. I want you to try and imagine a civilization so incomprehensibly advanced, so utterly detached from the normal material constraints of warfare, that their ultimate weapon isn't a bomb.
No.
It isn't an orbital laser. It isn't even like a self-replicating biological agent.
Yeah.
Their ultimate weapon, the thing they pull out when they really want to make a point, is the ability to literally turn off the sun.
It is the absolute definition of
Yeah.
playing God.
Yeah.
But what makes it so fascinating, and honestly so chilling, is that they do it with this terrifyingly cold bureaucratic efficiency.
Right.
When your solution to the localized planetary resistance movement is to just obliterate the entire solar system's primary light source, you have moved far, far beyond the realm of conventional warfare.
You're not even playing the same game anymore.
Exactly. You have entered the realm of cosmic engineering. It's a level of power where the destruction of an entire biosphere is just a rounding error in a much larger equation.
And that is exactly the equation we are trying to solve today. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the terrifying efficiency, the absolute ruthless pragmatism, and ultimately the incredibly tragic decay of one of the most devastating factions we've ever studied.
We are looking at the historical remnants of a faction of the Necron race known as the Mephrit Dynasty.
And these guys weren't just conquerors. I mean, our primary source today, a text called Solar Executioners, The Legacy of the Mephrit Dynasty, lays it all out. They were literally known as the Solar Executioners.
Which is just an incredibly heavy title.
It really is. So we are going to look at how they operated at their absolute historical peak, the mind-bending physics of the weapons they carried, and how, crucially, even a civilization capable of casually crushing a sun is still vulnerable to the most relentless enemy of all.
Which is time itself.
Yeah.
That is the core tension running through all of these historical records.
Yeah.
We are presented with this staggering contrast, On one hand, you have godlike cosmic power. The Mephrit dynasty possessed the ability to manipulate the fundamental engines of the universe.
Stars, gravity, nuclear fusion.
Exactly. And on the other hand, you have the inevitable corroding nature of time and entropy. We're looking at a civilization that genuinely believed they had conquered the cosmos, only to find themselves slowly rusting away, both literally and metaphorically, in the dark.
It's wild.
It is a profound meditation on the limits of technological supremacy, because no matter how brightly your empire burns, eventually the fire goes out.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand the tragedy of how far this dynasty has fallen, we have to start by looking at them when they were at the absolute zenith of their power.
Right back at the beginning.
Yeah. The records transport us back millions of years to an era simply referred to as the War in Heaven. Now, just think about the sheer weight of that name for a second. The War in Heaven. We aren't talking about, border skirmishes over a disputed asteroid mining facility.
No, not at all.
We are talking about a conflict so massive, so catastrophic, that it effectively rewrote the physics and the geography of the galaxy. It was a war that pitched pantheons of godlike beings against one another.
It was apocalyptic on a scale we can barely comprehend.
Exactly. And during this war in heaven, the Mephrit dynasty was assigned a very specific, very terrifying role by their supreme ruler, the Silent King. They were his solar executioners.
And we have to be clear here, that title is not poetic.
No.
It wasn't just a psychological terror tactic or some spooky moniker. It was their literal job description.
Uh-huh.
The historical records explicitly identify them as pitiless planet killers.
Pitiless.
Right. The Silent King didn't use the Mephrit Dynasty as standard infantry to hold territory or police conquered populations. He used them to delete territory. When a world proved especially defiant, when a civilization just refused to break under normal military pressure, the Silent King would summon the Mephrit legions to bring them to heel. They were the ultimate sanction.
And their method for doing this is what requires such a massive mental leap. I mean, they didn't just park a fleet in orbit and bombard the surface, right?
Well, that would be too conventional.
They utilize these figures called cryptechs. Now, from what we understand, cryptechs are the technological masters. They're the engineers and physicists of the Necron race.
That's correct.
But the Mephrit cryptechs specialized in something completely absurd. They possessed the ability to hyper-accelerate supernovae.
Just casually.
Right. They condemned entire defiant systems to death by turning their own stars against them. And the records, they describe the stars as withering and dying under the meticulous attentions of these cryptechs.
Meticulous attentions.
I just can't get over that phrase, meticulous attentions. It makes it sound like a botanist carefully pruning a rare orchid in a greenhouse. Except the orchid is a blazing ball of nuclear fusion 1,000,000 miles wide.
That freezing meticulous attentions is actually incredibly revealing, I think. It speaks to the deep underlying philosophy of the Mephrit Dynasty. They are described first and foremost as terrifyingly efficient and ruthlessly pragmatic.
Ruthlessly pragmatic.
We really need to dwell on the sheer cold logic of that pragmatism. From a human perspective, wiping out a star system seems like an act of unfathomable rage or just pure malice.
Well, absolutely. It seems like overkill.
Right. But for the Mephrit, it was simply the most logical solution to a logistical problem. Why is killing a star more pragmatic than fighting a ground war?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a permanent solution. You don't have to worry about a rebellion flaring up a century later if the planet no longer exists.
Precisely. But let's break down the mechanics of a conventional planetary invasion on a galactic scale. If you want to conquer a defiant world, you have to mobilize millions, perhaps billions of troops. You have to establish incredibly fragile interstellar supply lines.
Which can be cut.
Exactly. You have to secure orbit, deploy landing craft through anti-aircraft fire, engage in brutal urban pacification, manage insurgencies, feed your armies, and bleed your own forces dry in a conflict that could last generations.
It's a logistical nightmare.
It is. So the Mephrit Dynasty looked at that entire equation, the blood, the time, the wasted resources, and they simply found it highly inefficient.
So they just bypassed the entire process.
They bypassed the concept of war itself. To understand how they did this, we really have to look at the physics of a star.
Yeah.
A star is essentially a massive, very delicate balancing act.
Okay.
You have the crushing inward force of gravity constantly trying to collapse the star's mass, and you have the explosive outward force of nuclear fusion pushing back against that gravity.
Right, pushing outward.
The Mephrit cryptics figured out how to disrupt that balance. Now, we don't know the exact mechanism, whether they artificially exhausted the star's hydrogen fuel in a matter of days, or if they somehow manipulated the localized gravitational constant.
Which is terrifying to even think about.
Truly. But the result was a core collapse, followed by a hyper-accelerated supernova. And by doing that, you remove the enemy.
Yeah.
You remove the planet they stand on, you remove their neighboring planets, their orbital defense platforms, their asteroid belts, and every single monument to their history.
It's completely gone.
You reduce their entire sphere of existence to a rapidly expanding cloud of superheating gas. In one meticulous move, the problem isn't just solved, it is unmade.
It's okay, let's bring this down to a scale we can easily visualize for a second.
Sure.
Imagine you have a massive tech company, right? And they are dealing with a terrible infestation of locusts in their primary server farm. Most people would call an exterminator. You set up traps, you pump in some localized pesticides. It takes time. You might lose a few servers, but the building is still there when you are done.
Right, you still have a server farm.
Exactly. The Mephrit Dynasty's approach to pest control is, instead of dealing with the locusts inside the building, you just call down a tactical kinetic strike on the entire zip code.
Just level the grid.
You vaporize the servers, the building, the parking lot, and the surrounding 3 towns. The locusts are definitively gone, yes, but you've also erased the very thing you were theoretically fighting over.
It is the ultimate manifestation of total war, prioritizing absolute victory over any concept of spoils. But beyond the physical destruction, we really have to deeply consider the psychological terror of this weapon.
Oh, man.
Worlds weren't just conquered by the Mephrit Dynasty, they were made examples of. Defiance was met with stellar obliteration. I want you to just put yourself in the shoes of a civilization living on a neighboring star system for a second.
Just watching it happen.
Yes, you are watching this conflict unfold from light years away. You look through your observatories, and you see a thriving, heavily fortified, heavily populated solar system simply detonate.
Just gone.
It goes from a yellow dwarf to an expanding nebula of death in a matter of hours.
Mm-hmm.
The realization that washes over you is paralyzing. You realize that the enemy you are facing doesn't just want your resources, they don't want to enslave you.
Right.
They possess the power to casually extinguish the very light that gives your planet life. The psychological impact of that is absolute, unquestioning submission. You cannot fight an enemy who can turn off the sun. You can only kneel.
But looking at this critically, that raises a massive logistical and political question.
How so?
If you have the power to destroy a star, doesn't that functionally make you a god within this universe?
Yes, certainly.
How does a civilization even govern itself when its middle management, because that's what these cryptechs seem to be, highly specialized engineers, can just casually trigger a supernova?
There's a lot of localized power.
It's an insane amount of power. If you have that much destructive force at your fingertips, what stops a single disgruntled cryptech who maybe, I don't know, felt slighted by his superior from just blowing up the capital system?
Right.
The level of societal discipline, or perhaps the level of utter authoritarian control required to maintain an empire where stellar destruction is just another tool in the toolkit, it feels completely unfathomable.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical records give us the exact mechanism of how this impossible power was managed.
Okay.
It was managed by the absolute, unquestionable authority of the Silent King.
Yeah.
The Mephrit Dynasty didn't just go rogue and blow up stars on a whim. The text specifically notes that the Silent King summoned their legions.
Ah, so they were tools.
They were an instrument, a scalpel, albeit a very large apocalyptic scalpel, wielded by a singular overarching authority. They were the executioners, but they were absolutely not the judge or the jury.
So it's a huge distinction.
That distinction is vital for understanding Necron society at its peak. It shows that even at this tier of godlike cosmic power, there was a rigid, unyielding hierarchy built into their very consciousness.
Wow.
The ability to murder stars was highly compartmentalized, tightly weaponized, and directed solely at bringing troublesome worlds to heel. The sheer, terrifying scale of their destructive power was bound by an equally massive, almost suffocating scale of discipline and obedience.
Which, when you think about it, makes their eventual fate so much more tragic. We will get into how that perfect discipline shatters, but before we look at the fall of the dynasty, we need to talk about how they took this massive macro-scale cosmic power, the ability to destroy entire solar systems from afar, and scaled it down.
Yes.
Because they didn't just leave their star-killing technology orbiting in space. They actually brought it down to the ground. They brought it down to the infantry level.
And this is where the engineering prowess of the Mephrit Dynasty truly crosses the line from highly advanced science into something that borders on the magical or even the absurd.
Honestly, it's just ridiculous.
We know they mastered stellar phenomena on a macro scale, but the records state that this mastery is also evident in their personal weaponry. Their standard infantry arms, these weapons called Gauss weapons, are literally powered by the energy of captive suns.
Captive suns. Just let that roll around in your head for a second. Capturing a sun to power a rifle.
It's hard to even picture.
The records mention that these Gauss weapons emit a very distinct, vibrant orange glow. And it specifies that this glow isn't just like an LED or an aesthetic choice. It is a tangible reminder of the starfire they have harnessed.
Right.
It is literally the ambient, radioactive bleed-off of a captured star leaking out of the barrel of a gun.
It is a phenomenal flex of technological supremacy. Right. But the most profound example of this micro-scale cosmic engineering is their ultimate relic, an artifact mentioned in the records as the Conduit of Stars.
Yes, the Conduit of Stars.
This is described as a specialized Gauss blaster that contains a fragment of a dying star. The runoff energy of this fragment is compressed into lethal, targeted blasts. We really need to luxuriate in the sheer impossible physics of this for a moment.
Please do.
What does it actually mean to compress a dying star's energy into a handheld firearm? As we discussed, a dying star is a cosmic catastrophe. When that balance of gravity and fusion collapses, the resulting forces crush atoms together, creating hyperdense exotic matter.
Things like neutronium.
Exactly, neutronium, where a single teaspoon weighs billions of tons. To harvest a fragment of that process right at the moment of stellar death, to extract it, to stabilize it in a localized stasis field, to compress its furious radioactive output, and to house it within a physical metal casing that an infantryman can hold in their hands.
It breaks your brain.
It completely defies our foundational understanding of physics. The energy requirements for the containment field alone would dwarf the entire energy output of most modern civilizations.
It is essentially like carrying a controlled nuclear meltdown in your backpack, except the meltdown is 1 billion times hotter and the backpack is a perfectly balanced rifle.
That's a very good way to put it.
And you just point it at someone and pull a trigger. But as I was reading this section, trying to visualize this incredible glowing orange starfire, a massive contradiction jumped out at me.
Oh.
You have this weapon, the conduit of stars, glowing with the purest, most vibrant, furious energy in the universe. But who is actually holding it?
The soldiers themselves.
Yeah. The records give us an incredibly detailed visual description of the Mephrit Dynasty soldiers. It describes them as having burnished iron or bronze bodies, but heavily marked by a weathered patina.
Yes.
And this weathered patina is set against olive green or teal armored plates.
The visual contrast is absolutely breathtaking when you really visualize it.
It is so jarring. You have this godlike, eternal, brilliant orange starfire, literally the engine of the cosmos, clashing directly against weathered, oxidized bronze and heavily tarnished teal armor.
It's quite the aesthetic.
It is the ultimate visual juxtaposition of eternal cosmic energy and physical bodily decay. They are walking onto the battlefield looking like ancient oxidized statues dug out of a shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean, but they are firing the raw, unadulterated stuff of creation from their hands.
What's fascinating here is that it forces us to ask whether it is an intentional intimidation tactic or a tragic byproduct of their history. The patina on bronze is fundamentally a chemical reaction. It is oxidation.
Well, it's a rust.
Exactly. It is physical evidence of an object's interaction with time and harsh environments. It is the literal definition of decay. For a race that possesses the technological mastery to wield the power of stars, to bear the physical markers of rust and decay suggests a deep underlying systemic vulnerability.
We're falling apart.
The starfire they harness is eternal, but the metallic vessels that hold that fire and the bodies of the soldiers wielding it are not.
And the historical records go even further with this theme of decay. It talks about their heraldry, their dynastic symbols.
The constellation.
Right. It says their symbol was once a perfect reflection of the specific constellation surrounding their crown, their capital planet. It was a map of their home stars. But now it has become utterly unrecognizable.
It's faded away.
The text specifically frames this as a testament to the eons of decay that have reshaped their empire. It's like, imagine you are an archaeologist and you dig up an ancient artifact and it has a faded, scratched up corporate logo on it from 1,000 years ago.
Okay.
Once upon a time, that logo meant everything. It was on every skyscraper, every product, every uniform. It projected absolute power, wealth, and stability.
And now?
Now it's just a meaningless collection of scratched lines on tarnished metal. You can't even tell what it was originally supposed to represent.
Yeah.
That is the tragedy of the Mephrit Dynasty's symbol.
And the decay we are discussing isn't just physical, it's conceptual.
Yeah.
A symbol is the core of a civilization's identity. It is how they project who they are to themselves and to the universe.
Yeah.
If your symbol is unrecognizable, it means your connection to your own history, your own foundational purpose has been severed. Time has done to the Mephrit Dynasty what they once did to those defiant star systems. It has steadily, meticulously eroded them until only a ghost remains.
But wait, this is where the logic breaks down for me, and I find myself questioning the records.
Yes.
If these Necrons are so incredibly advanced that they can invent a micro-containment field to hold a piece of a dying sun, why on earth are they walking around with a weathered patina?
That's the paradox.
Why wouldn't they maintain themselves perfectly? If you have the physics to command gravity and fusion, surely you can invent a decent molecular rust remover or, I don't know, self-repairing living metal.
You would think so.
The fact that they are oxidized points to a massive systemic lapse in time where they were completely inactive, or it suggests a total loss of their foundational maintenance capabilities. How do you reconcile a society that can murder a star but can't polish its own armor?
That is the pivotal question, and is the exact thread we need to pull to unravel the heart of their current tragedy. The historical records provide the answer, though it requires some context.
Okay, lay it on us.
They experienced an era-defining event called the Great Sleep. You have to understand, this wasn't a civilization that continuously evolved, adapted, and maintained its infrastructure over the millions of years since the War in Heaven.
So they didn't just stay awake building things.
No. They fought their apocalyptic war, the galaxy was left in ruins, and to outlast the catastrophic aftermath, the entire Necron race entered a state of profound, digitized hibernation deep within their tomb worlds.
Millions of years of sleep.
And in that multi-million-year dormancy, they were incredibly vulnerable, their automated defense systems degraded, the tectonic plates of their planet shifted, and they were left entirely exposed to the ravages of deep time.
Right. And that immense transition from their historical peak, when they were the undisputed masters of the war in heaven, the destroyers of stars, to their current rusted state of decay, all hinges on what happened during this great sleep.
It was a disaster for them.
Because it wasn't just their armor that degraded while they were sleeping. They lost the single most important thing holding their entire ruthless, highly disciplined, pragmatic system together. They lost their leadership.
Exactly. The rigid hierarchy we discussed earlier, the absolute discipline required to manage star-killing weapons safely, was entirely dependent on a clear chain of command. We are introduced to their dynastic leader, Pharaoh Kyrek the Eternal.
Kyrek the Eternal.
And the irony of his title, the Eternal, is almost too perfect, because he was destroyed while completely defenseless in stasis during this great sleep. The records suggest he was assassinated by the Eldor.
Now, for anyone unfamiliar, the Eldar are essentially an incredibly ancient, highly psychic, elegant race that relies heavily on prescience, stealth, and manipulation. They are the polar opposite of the Mephrit's brute force cosmic engineering.
Entirely different paradigm of war.
But the sheer irony here, you are the undisputed masters of cosmic destruction. You have the power to casually turn off the sun of your enemies. You have weapons powered by dying stars.
And you rule the cosmos.
Right. And how is your supreme leader defeated? He is essentially murdered in his bed by a sneaky assassin with a blade while taking a million-year nap. It is such an ignominious, pathetic end for a being called the Eternal.
It perfectly highlights the paradox of their power.
Yeah.
You can build a fortress capable of withstanding a hyper-accelerated supernova. You can engineer planetary shields that can deflect the wrath of a god.
Yeah.
But if you go to sleep for 60 million years and your automated security protocols slowly degrade, leaving a ventilation shaft unlocked, a single prescient Eldar assassin can slip in and end your entire dynastic lineage with a single strike.
It's crazy.
The Eldar bypassed the Mephrit's macro-scale apocalyptic defenses entirely and struck at their most microscopic vulnerability, a sleeping king. And the result of that single assassination was catastrophic for the entire dynasty.
Catastrophic because, suddenly, that perfect discipline is gone, and it creates a massive power vacuum. Kyrek the Eternal is dead, and now the Mephrit Dynasty is completely fractured.
It shatters them.
The records describe their current state upon waking up as one of brutal infighting ambition. The lesser nobility, the overlords who used to just follow orders, are now tearing each other apart in their own empire, trying to fill the void.
It's chaos.
We are introduced to the three main contenders for the throne, and I just have to read their titles because they paint such a vivid psychological portrait. We have Overlord Zarathustra the Ineffable, we have Enethet the Glorious, and we have Anubatar of the Thousand Victories.
Those titles are incredibly revealing, aren't they?
You're so arrogant.
They scream of massive egos desperately trying to compensate for an impossible void of actual authority. When you were essentially just a regional military commander of a fractured, rusted, decaying empire, you don't call yourself Zarathustra the Administrator or Enethet the Bureaucrat.
Right, you need something bigger.
You call yourself the Ineffable, which literally means you believe you are so great, so divine, that your majesty cannot even be expressed in words. You call yourself the Glorious. You boast of 1,000 victories.
It's pure projection.
These are beings who woke up from millions of years of sleep, found their civilization in ruins, and immediately adopted these grandiose personas. They are desperate to project an aura of supreme competence and absolute authority in a situation where they actually possess very little of either.
It is the ultimate corporate nightmare scenario taken to a galactic extreme. It's like, imagine you are a mid-level manager at a massively successful global tech conglomerate.
Okay.
You go into a cryogenic sleep, expecting to wake up in a glorious, advanced utopian future where your company owns the world. But instead, you wake up from this millennia-long nap, push open the cryopod, and find out that the CEO was assassinated in his pod by a corporate spy centuries ago.
And the company is bankrupt.
The building is falling apart, the servers are rusting, and now all the regional branch managers, instead of working together to fix the company and turn the power back on, have militarized their respective departments.
Oh, boy.
The accounting department is launching mortar strikes at human resources, and everyone is engaged in a bloody, brutal civil war in the company cafeteria just to see who gets to sit in the CEO's corner office.
And in doing so, of course, they are systematically destroying the very company they are so desperate to control. This is the central tragic flaw of the Mephrit Dynasty's current existence. The pragmatic, terrifying efficiency that once defined them has been turned entirely inward.
Right, and that is exactly what I was thinking as I read this. If their ultimate goal is to prove their supremacy and claim the title of Pharaon through military victory over each other, aren't they just depleting their own already decaying resources? The records clearly state that their bodies are already weathered, their self-repair mechanisms are failing, their dynastic symbols are unrecognizable. Every single time Zarathustra the Ineffable engages in a massive artillery duel with the Nubitar of the Thousand Victories, they must be destroying irreplaceable Mephrit technology and millions of their own personnel.
It's a zero-sum game.
Isn't this massive ego-driven infighting going to destroy their dynasty far faster and far more thoroughly than the Eldar assassins ever could?
It is a classic Shakespearean cycle of self-destruction born entirely from hubris. They are so blindingly focused on who gets to hold the royal scepter that they are completely ignoring the fact that the roof of the throne room is caving in on them.
Just totally blind to it.
However, we have to give them a sliver of credit. They aren't completely blind to the reality of their situation. These overlords, for all their ego, still retain a spark of that ancient Mephrit pragmatism.
Do they?
They do. They realize that mere tactical victories over each other, capturing a tomb world here, destroying a rival's fleet there, aren't enough to solidify their rule. They know their armies are finite and their resources are dwindling. To truly end the civil war and force the other overlords to submit, they need something more than just a slight military advantage.
They need a trump card.
Exactly. They need a symbol of absolute, unquestionable authority.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the historical records finally reveal the true prize these overlords are fighting over. They aren't just fighting for territory or ruined planets.
No, the stakes are much higher.
The ultimate prize, the one thing that will definitively crown one of them as the new Pharaon and force the others to their metallic knees, is reclaiming the ancient ability to murder stars. They want the old technology back. They want the super weapons that made them the solar executioners in the first place.
And this is where the sheer tragedy and the profound irony of their situation truly peaks. Think about it. The civilization that used to casually command supernovae, the solar executioners who held the entire universe in a state of absolute terror, no longer remembers how to do it.
They literally forgot.
They have lost the knowledge. The eons of decay, the millions of years of digitized slumber haven't just rusted their bronze armor. It has rusted their databanks, corrupted their memories, and erased their institutional knowledge. The greatest weapon ever engineered by the Necron race is now just a myth to the very people who built it.
So how do they get it back? Because obviously Zarathustra the Ineffable can't just sit down with a whiteboard and reinvent supernova hyperacceleration from scratch.
I don't think he's the whiteboard type, no.
The records say they are forced to turn to outside help. They have to seek out these figures known as the technomandrites. Now, from the context, the technomandrites seem to be this incredibly powerful, highly secretive conclave of cryptex who operate somewhat outside the standard dynastic structure.
They are sort of a rogue element.
They are basically the ultimate hoarders of Necron technology, and they may hold the key, or the blueprints, to the Mephrit's lost weapons.
The situational irony here is incredibly rich. The Mephrit overlords, these beings walking around with titles like the Glorious and the Ineffable, beings who demand absolute submission from their lessers, are now reduced to the role of beggars.
It's so embarrassing for them.
They are forced to seek out these secretive tech priests and plead for scraps of their own lost knowledge. It's an intensely humiliating position for a nobility that once commanded the stars themselves, but it demonstrates just how desperate they are.
Yeah, they have no other choice.
And this desperation is a massive narrative pivot because it pulls them out of their isolated internal civil war and forces them to actively engage with the chaotic, messy reality of the wider universe. They can't just hide in their tomb worlds anymore. They have to venture out to find the technomandrites.
Which brings us to perhaps the most incredible, mind-boggling tactical pivot in this entire historical record. We follow the specific actions of one of these contenders, Overlord Zarathustra the Ineffable.
Right. According to the records, he awakens from his great sleep on a planet called the Crown World of Perdita, located in the Kryptis system. Now, you can imagine Zarathustra waking up, the stasis fields dropping, his optical sensors coming online.
He's probably expecting a parade.
He's stretching his metallic legs, fully prepared to march out, rally his rusted legions, and go conquer his rivals to claim the throne. And what does he find waiting for him the moment he opens the front door of his tomb?
He discovers a full-scale Tyranid invasion.
A Tyranid invasion.
Yeah.
Now, we have to pause and explain exactly what that means for a Necron overlord.
Oh, it's the worst-case scenario.
The Tyranids aren't just another political faction. They are an extragalactic, endless swarm of purely biological nightmares. They are apex predators that travel the cosmos, consuming all biomass, drinking oceans, and leaving barren rocks in their wake. They are the ultimate biological consumption engine.
Essentially a plague of galactic proportions. So Zarathustra wakes up expecting to fight a highly formalized, heavily political civil war against his fellow metallic Necrons, and instead his front lawn is literally swarming with billions of screaming, acid-spitting biological horrors that are trying to eat his planet.
It's quite the wake-up call.
And what does Zarathustra, this incredibly arrogant, ego-driven overlord of the once mighty solar executioners, do? Does he stand alone in his ineffable glory and try to fight them off out of sheer pride?
Absolutely not.
No. The historical records state that he is immediately forced into an alliance.
And we must emphasize, this is not just any alliance. This is a completely pragmatic, incredibly desperate, almost unthinkable alliance. He allies with a wandering Necron noble named Anrakir the Traveler, and most crucially of all, he allies with a Blood Angels garrison.
The Blood Angels. This is where the story just gets absolutely wild.
It really does.
The Blood Angels are a faction of Space Marines, genetically engineered, biologically augmented super soldiers fighting for the human Imperium, wrapped in blood-red armor. They represent a completely different empire, a completely different species, and typically they would shoot a Necron on sight.
Without a second thought.
But they just happen to be garrisoned nearby in the Kryptis system when the Tyranids attack. It's like, let's go back to our tech company analogy.
All right, sure.
Imagine you are the CEO of a dying, archaic tech company. Your building is old, your servers are failing. Suddenly, you look out the window and see a literal biblical plague of locusts descending on your building, threatening to eat the very wires in the walls.
Right.
And out in the parking lot is a brutal, heavily armed, street-level, private military contractor group who just happen to be driving by. Do you ask for their credentials?
No.
Do you argue about corporate philosophy? No. You immediately unlock the armory, hand them some of your experimental laser weapons, and say, if you help me kill these locusts, we both get to live today. At that exact moment of existential dread, you do not care who they are, you do not care what their politics are, you just need their guns firing in the same direction as yours.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the sheer cold logic of the situation. And it circles us all the way back to the very first sentence of our source material, the defining trait of the Mephrit Dynasty, ruthlessly pragmatic.
It always comes back to that.
Zarathustra waking up to an existential threat that he cannot defeat alone and immediately discarding any notions of racial purity or imperial pride or historical grievances to team up with biologically engineered humans is the ultimate expression of that pragmatism.
Survival first.
Survival trumps pride every single time. The Mephrit Dynasty, even in its decayed, fractured, heavily oxidized state, still retains that cold, calculated, algorithmic logic. If allying with the Blood Angels ensures the survival of the Crown World of Perdita, and by extension keeps Zarathustra alive long enough to find the star-killing tech, then an alliance is instantly formed. The calculation takes milliseconds.
But the calculation is also incredibly short-sighted, isn't it? Let's play this scenario out a little further, because this is where the real horror of the Mephrit mindset reveals itself.
Okay, let's play it out.
Zarathustra's entire overarching goal on Perdita is to secure his crown world, clear out the Tyranids, and presumably gain access to the technomandrites so he can finally get the star-killing technology back online.
That's the plan.
If Zarathustra actually succeeds here, if he gets the supernova tech back and defeats the Tyranid swarm alongside his new brothers in arms, the Blood Angels, what happens to that alliance the very next morning?
It evaporates.
Do we really honestly think a newly crowned solar executioner is going to play nice and sign a peace treaty with a human space marine chapter once the mutual threat is neutralized?
This raises an important question, and it is perhaps the most important question of this entire historical deep dive.
Lay it out.
If Zarathustra reclaims the power of the supernova, the dynamic of the entire galactic sector instantly shifts. The Blood Angels immediately cease to be useful allies. They instantly revert to being a troublesome alien presence occupying a sector near a Mephrit crown world.
And we know what they do with troublesome worlds.
Exactly. As we established at the very beginning of our discussion, we know exactly how the Mephrit Dynasty deals with troublesome worlds. The ruthlessly pragmatic solution, the most efficient logistical move once the Tyranids are gone and the star-killing tech is fully online, is to simply erase the Blood Angels, the planet they stand on, and the star that shines upon them.
Just wipe them off the map.
The alliance is nothing more than a temporary equation. The moment the variables change, the alliance is mathematically obsolete.
It's absolute chilling. It really is. Imagine being a Blood Angel commander. You are fighting shoulder to shoulder with these ancient, silent bronze machines.
Side by side against the swarm.
You are bleeding and dying to hold the line together against the Tyranids, completely unaware that the only reason your new ally hasn't vaporized you and your entire solar system yet is simply because they temporarily forgot the password to the vaporizer.
Exactly. The malice isn't personal. It's purely systemic.
Yeah.
And this realization asks a much broader philosophical question of the universe they inhabit.
Which is?
Is the ability to murder stars a power that any faction, no matter how advanced, should actually be allowed to reclaim? When you look at the towering hubris of Zarathustra, Ednathet, and Anubitar, these fragmented, ego-driven, deeply flawed remnants of a dead empire fighting civil wars in the ashes of their own civilization, the thought of handing them the trigger to a hyper-accelerated supernova is utterly terrifying.
It's giving a child a nuclear launch code.
You can make a very strong logical argument that the universe is actually much safer with the Mephrit Dynasty, exactly as they are trapped in a state of decayed ignorance, fighting over scraps, and forced into desperate alliances just to survive.
Wow. Okay, let's just sit with that for a second, because the sheer scope and scale of what we have just covered in this hour is enormous.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started with the silent, majestic, and deeply horrifying reality of entire solar systems being meticulously snuffed out on a bureaucratic whim.
Yes.
We zoomed all the way in to look at the impossible mind-bending physics of a dying star trapped in a handheld weapon carried by soldiers whose very armor was rusting away beneath the glow of that eternal energy.
The rusted armor and the orange glow.
We witnessed a supposedly eternal king assassinated in his sleep by a surgical strike, watching his empire immediately fracture into a petty, devastating civil war driven by pure ego.
And then the Tyranids showed up.
Right. And we ended on a desperate, entirely pragmatic alliance formed in the grim shadow of a biological invasion, with the ultimate hidden goal being to relearn how to destroy the universe.
It is a sweeping historical epic, a massive arc of rise and ruin contained within just a few fragmented historical records.
So what does this all mean? For you, the listener, the core takeaway from this deep dive is that the story of the Mephrit Dynasty is the ultimate masterclass in the absolute, inescapable reality of entropy.
Entropy always wins.
It is a historical proof that even the most absolute, star-crushing, godlike power is not immune to the slow march of time. It's not immune to physical decay. And it is certainly not immune to internal political fragmentation and the flaws of ego. You can engineer a weapon that murders a sun, but you cannot build an empire that outlasts time itself.
And that leads me to a final lingering thought for you to consider long after we wrap up today.
Give it to us.
Think back to the conduit of stars, that extraordinary relic we discussed, the weapon holding a compressed, furious fragment of a dying star. If the Mephrit Dynasty's entire cultural identity, their entire historical legacy, is built on harvesting and weaponizing the violent death throes of suns, what happens when their own civilization inevitably enters its own death throes?
Oh, wow.
Are they themselves destined to just become a compressed, dying fragment of history? Just a faded, unrecognizable symbol on a piece of tarnished bronze, briefly burning bright with the violence of a civil war, before finally falling into the hands of whatever new, younger power inherits the universe. Keep that in mind the next time you look up at the night sky and see the stars shining down.
An incredibly haunting, beautiful thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the cosmic graveyard of the solar executioners. Keep asking the big questions, keep looking up, and we will catch you on the next one.